In the vast emptiness of space where the Mass Effect saga unfolds, millions of fans wait with bated breath for the next new chapter. Mass Effect 5 is no longer just a dream, but a reality in development, sending ripples of excitement and speculation throughout the gaming community. Yet, beneath this enthusiasm lies a fundamental question that grows more present with each passing day. Can BioWare successfully navigate the complex narrative labyrinth left behind by the trilogy's controversial conclusion? Perhaps even more importantly, should they even try? The original Mass Effect trilogy concluded not with a whimper but with a bang. Or rather, several possible bangs, each one reshaping the galaxy in profoundly different ways. The Reaper War wasn't merely another conflict to be recorded in galactic history. It was a cataclysmic event that fundamentally altered the fabric of civilization itself. When Commander Shepard faced with the Catalyst, players were presented with choices that would forever change the course of the Mass Effect universe. With the Destroy option, Shepard sacrificed all synthetic life forms across the galaxy. The Reapers, yes, but also potentially the newly sentient Geth and beloved companions like EDI. The Mass Effect relays suffer severe damage, fragmenting the carefully woven tapestry of galactic society. Choosing control meant something far more metaphysical. Shepard's consciousness transcended physical form to merge with the Catalyst, becoming an immortal intelligence guiding the very Reapers that once threatened all life. The Shepard became the flock. The synthesis path represented perhaps the most radical transformation, forcing a merger of organic and synthetic life across the entire galaxy. Every living being fundamentally changed at the molecular level, creating an entirely new form of existence without consent but with the promise of true harmony. And then there was refusal, the choice to reject the Catalyst options entirely. This path allowed the cycle to continue, the Reapers to triumph, and place hope in the hands of future civilizations to do what Shepard could not. These wildly divergent outcomes present BioWare with a puzzle unlike any other in gaming history. How do you craft a cohesive narrative that honors the weight of these choices while establishing a foundation stable enough to support a new story? It's like trying to build a house on shifting sands during an earthquake. The Indoctrination theory emerged from the community as players grappled with the trilogy's controversial ending. This theory suggests that Shepard never actually made it to the Citadel beam during the final battle. Instead, everything that followed, the encounter with the Catalyst, the three color choices, even Anderson and the elusive man's appearances, occurred within Shepard's mind as the Reapers attempted to indoctrinate our hero. The theory transforms the ending from a literal conclusion to a psychological battleground where Shepard fights for control of their own mind, with the different color endings representing different outcomes of this internal struggle. The Indoctrination theory offers BioWare a unique opportunity for narrative redemption. By validating this fan theory, they could address the controversial ending head-on, potentially healing the rift with disillusioned fans by reframing the trilogy's conclusion as a brilliant psychological fake-out rather than a disappointing deus ex machina. Such an approach would allow Mass Effect 5 to explore uncharted territory in psychological depth. Imagine navigating a world where reality itself is suspect, where environments shift between the physical and the hallucinatory without warning. Characters whose loyalty seemed unquestionable might appear in new light, their words and actions colored by the lingering influence of Reaper indoctrination attempting to reassert control over Shepard's fragile psyche. The theory also carries profound thematic resonance with the original trilogy. From the beginning, indoctrination loomed as a central threat. We witnessed its corruption of Saren, its manipulation of the elusive man, its slow poison working through countless minds across the galaxy. Making Shepard's personal battle against this insidious influence the core of a new game would bring this theme full circle, completing the narrative arc that began with the first encounter on Eden Prime. Perhaps most practically, the indoctrination theory offers a path to choice reconciliation. If none of the original endings actually occur in the physical world, BioWare gains the freedom to establish a single canonical aftermath of the Reaper War without directly invalidating any player's choice, because those choices represent their mental states rather than physical actions. For all its elegant solutions, the indoctrination theory risks committing the cardinal sin of narrative invalidation. Players who emotionally invested in their ending choices, who mourned EDI's death or celebrated the synthetic organic harmony of synthesis, might feel betrayed to learn their decisions were merely symbolic conflicts within Shepard's mind. The theory threatens to retroactively transform meaningful choices into an elaborate illusion. There's also the risk of a scale reduction. Mass Effect has always been about galaxy-spanning conflicts, the clash of civilizations, the interplay of diverse cultures across the stars. A game primarily focused on Shepard's internal psychological struggle might feel claustrophobic by comparison, trading the vastness of space for the confines of a single consciousness. The theory carries a heavy explanation burden as well. For players unfamiliar with this fan theory, which remains outside official canon, a game based on the Indoctrination theory would require extensive exposition to make sense of its premise. This could create a significant barrier to entry for newcomers to the franchise while potentially feeling like retreading old ground for veterans. Most critically, the theory remains deeply divisive within the community. Some see it as a brilliant interpretation that salvages a disappointing conclusion. Others view it as an elaborate fan fiction that ignores the creator's intent. Building Mass Effect 5 on this foundation would inevitably please some while alienating others, potentially creating more controversy rather than resolving it. Before the catalyst and its cyclical purges were introduced in Mass Effect 3, lead writer Drew Karpyshyn had envisioned a different explanation for the Reaper threat. This dark matter theory proposed that Mass Effect technology, the very foundation of advanced civilization in the galaxy, was gradually causing dark energy to accumulate, destabilizing the fabric of the universe itself. In this original conception, the Reaper's harvest cycle wasn't about preventing synthetic life from destroying organic life. It was about studying sentient species to find a solution to this cosmic deterioration before the universe collapsed entirely. Each cycle represented another attempt to find a species that might solve this existential threat. The dark matter theory introduces a fresh existential threat that feels distinctively different from the Reaper conflict while maintaining the series' hard sci-fi foundations. It transforms the stakes from the relatively straightforward survive the Reapers to the more complex save the universe from gradual physics-based collapse, a threat that can't be defeated with conventional weapons or diplomatic alliances. This plotline would push Mass Effect towards becoming a scientific mystery, potentially focusing on a multi-species expedition to understand and counterattack dark energy's effects. Such a direction would align perfectly with the franchise's original themes of exploration and discovery, returning to the sense of wonder that made the first game so captivating. Perhaps most intriguingly, BioWare already laid the groundwork for this concept in Mass Effect 2, with Tali's recruitment mission on Haestrom, where Asan was aging prematurely due to dark energy buildup.
What can you tell me about your research here?
Haestrom's sun is destabilizing. Back when this was a Quarian colony, it was a normal star. It shouldn't change that quickly.
Any idea what's destabilizing the sun?
If I had to guess, I'd say that it was dark energy affecting the interior of the star. The effect is similar to when stars blow off mass to enter a red giant phase, but Haestrom's sun is far too young for this to be natural.
This established foundation could be expanded rather than abandoned, creating a sense of narrative foreshadowing that spans the entire franchise. The dark matter theory also offers significant narrative freedom. By introducing a threat that exists regardless of the Reaper War's outcome, BioWare could craft a story less constrained by prior ending choices, while still acknowledging the trilogy's events and their importance to galactic history. Pivoting to dark matter as the real threat after 3 games centered on the Reaper cycle would require a massive retcon of established lore. It might feel like BioWare is arbitrarily changing the rules of their universe rather than building organically on what came before. The theory faces serious continuity issues as well. The dark matter concept received minimal development in Mass Effect 3, making its sudden prominence in a sequel potentially jarring without extensive exposition that might feel forced or artificial. There's also the problem of late-stage introduction. Presenting such a fundamental cosmic crisis after the supposed resolution of the trilogy's central conflict risks feeling like artificially extending the story rather than a natural progression of the narrative. It's like introducing a new villain after the hero has already saved the day. It can work, but it requires exceptional execution to avoid feeling contrived. Finally, the scientific complexity of dark matter, a concept that remains theoretical and abstract even in real-world physics, might prove challenging to translate into compelling gameplay mechanics and approachable storytelling. Mass Effect has always balanced scientific plausibility with dramatic necessity, but explaining how players can fight an invisible force that's unraveling the universe itself presents a unique challenge. Perhaps the most grounded approach would be to focus Mass Effect 5 primarily on the aftermath and recovery from the Reaper War. With trillions dead, infrastructure destroyed across thousands of worlds, and the delicate balance of galactic power shattered, the post-war Milky Way would be a landscape of unprecedented challenges. Resources would be scarce, with worlds cut off from the trade networks they once depended on. Political tensions would flare as species compete for limited supplies and habitable territories. Former enemies might become reluctant allies out of necessity, while traditional alliances fracture under the strain of rebuilding. This approach offers a rich political canvas for storytelling. The power vacuum left by the Reaper War would create natural tensions between the surviving species, each with their own priorities and visions for the rebuilt galaxy. The Krogan might demand an end to the genophage restrictions as payment for their war service, while the Quarians and Geth, if they survived, navigate an unprecedented coexistence. The Asari, having hidden Prothean technology for centuries, might face a crisis of legitimacy in galactic politics. A rebuilding narrative would show players the meaningful consequences of their struggle against the Reapers. Rather than simply moving to a new thread, Mass Effect 5 could explore how the galaxy is shaped by the sacrifices made during the war, honoring the weight of those choices rather than diminishing them. This direction could introduce compelling civilization-building mechanics to the series. Players might make decisions about allocating resources, prioritizing reconstruction projects, and mediating conflicts between species, all with long-term consequences for the galactic community. Imagine establishing new colonies, restoring damaged mass relays, or creating alliances that will shape politics for generations to come. After the cosmic stakes of fighting the Reapers, a more localized focus would provide grounded storytelling that feels intimate and personal. The grand existential threat has been defeated. Now comes the equally challenging work of building something worth fighting for in the first place. A rebuilding narrative faces significant pacing concerns. The deliberate rhythm of diplomatic negotiation and reconstruction efforts might feel anticlimactic after the high-stakes action of the original trilogy. Without a clear pressing thread, the story risks losing the sense of urgency that drove players forwards through the previous games. This approach also creates an action deficit that could be difficult to reconcile with Mass Effect's established gameplay. The series balances storytelling with combat sequences, and a reconstruction-focused narrative might struggle to provide compelling action without manufacturing artificial conflicts that undermine the theme of recovery. Most problematically, the state of the post-war galaxy would vary dramatically depending on which ending players chose in Mass Effect 3. The aftermath of Destroy, with its elimination of synthetic life, would look fundamentally different from the hybrid existence created by synthesis or the Reaper-controlled future of the Control ending. Crafting a consistent rebuilding narrative that acknowledges all these possibilities might prove impossible without significant compromises. There's also the risk of redundancy. Mass Effect 3 already explored many aspects of diplomatic coalition building during the Reaper War. A sequel focusing primarily on similar themes of alliance forming and resource management might feel like retreading familiar ground rather than pushing the narrative forward. Even if Commander Shepard doesn't return as the playable protagonist, their legacy would inevitably cast a long shadow over any new Mass Effect story. This approach would focus on how Shepard's actions and choices continue to reverberate through the galaxy, shaping events and inspiring new heroes long after their personal story has concluded. Whether through recordings, flashbacks, the accounts of surviving companions, or the myths and legends that grow around the Commander's deeds, Shepard's influence would remain a tangible force in the narrative, a touchstone connecting the new story to the beloved original trilogy. Shepard represents the emotional core of the original trilogy. Acknowledging their legacy would provide a crucial bridge between the original games and a new story, helping longtime fans connect with fresh characters and conflicts while honoring their attachment to the Commander. In a post-Shepard galaxy, different factions would inevitably mythologize the Commander's deeds in different ways. Some might venerate Shepard as a messiah, while others could twist their legacy to justify their own agendas. Exploring these competing interpretations could create fascinating narrative tensions, especially if the player, who knows the truth behind the legends, must navigate between these distorted versions of history. New characters could grapple with the challenge of living in Shepard's shadow, creating compelling personal arcs about finding one's own path while honoring the example set by a legendary predecessor. This struggle for identity could provide rich character development for a new protagonist trying to establish themselves in a galaxy that constantly compares them to Shepard. From a practical standpoint, references to Shepard could be kept deliberately ambiguous enough to accommodate any of the original ending choices. By focusing on the commander's undisputed accomplishments, uniting the galaxy, fighting the Reapers, rather than the specific outcome of their final choice, BioWare could honor player decisions without being completely constrained by them. If Shepard's legacy dominates the narrative, new protagonists might struggle to establish their own significance, feeling perpetually overshadowed by a character who isn't even present. This could undermine players' investment in the new hero and their journey, making the game feel like an extended epilogue rather than a story worth telling in its own right. Any mentions of Shepard inevitably raises expectations for their return. If Mass Effect 5 repeatedly references Shepard without delivering their actual presence, some fans might feel teased or misled, creating disappointment that colors their experience of the otherwise new story. Constantly acknowledging Shepard's influence could actually create narrative constraints rather than freedom. Writers might find themselves forced to tiptoe around specific mentions of what exactly Shepard did to avoid contradicting any player choices, resulting in vague, unsatisfying references that please no one. Perhaps most fundamentally, a game too fixated on Shepard's legacy risks being backward-looking rather than forward-thinking. While honoring what came before is important, Mass Effect 5 needs to establish its own identity and push the franchise in bold new directions to remain vital and relevant. This approach would center Mass Effect 5 on an entirely new protagonist with their own distinct background, motivations, and skill set. While they might have some connection to the events of characters of the original trilogy, this hero would be fundamentally different from Shepard, perhaps even belonging to a non-human species, offering a completely fresh perspective on the Mass Effect universe. This new character would forge their own path through the post-Reaper galaxy, facing challenges suited to their unique abilities and making decisions that shape both their personal journey and the future of interstellar civilization. A new protagonist offers the chance to experience the Mass Effect universe through fresh eyes, potentially from a completely different cultural or species viewpoint. Imagine exploring the rebuilding galaxy as a Janissari commando, a Turian peacekeeper, or even a synthetic being trying to understand organic life. Each would bring a unique perspective that could revitalize the narrative. From a storytelling perspective, a protagonist without Shepard's established history provides writers with greater creative freedom. They could craft compelling personal arcs without worrying about maintaining consistency with every player's version of Shepard, allowing for more defined character development. A new hero could justify introducing fresh gameplay systems and abilities that wouldn't have made sense for Shepard. Perhaps this protagonist relies more on stealth than direct combat, uses biotic abilities in novel ways, or has access to technology that didn't exist during the original trilogy. These mechanical innovations could help Mass Effect 5 feel like a genuine evolution of the series rather than simply more of the same. For players unfamiliar with the original trilogy, a new protagonist provides an accessible entry point to the Mass Effect universe. While the game would still acknowledge past events, newcomers could connect with this character's journey without feeling they have missed crucial context, allowing Mass Effect 5 to function as both a sequel and a soft reboot. Any new protagonist would inevitably face comparison to Commander Shepard, a character players spend hundreds of hours embodying across 3 games. Living in Shepard's shadow could make it difficult for this new hero to establish the same emotional connection with the audience, regardless of how well written they might be. If the new protagonist has no meaningful connection to the original trilogy's events or characters, the game might feel disconnected from what made Mass Effect special to longtime fans. Without those anchors to the established narrative, the sequel risks feeling like Mass Effect in name only, a different story wearing familiar armor. The investment barrier presents another significant challenge. Players spend hundreds of hours as Shepard, making decisions and forming relationships that came to define their personal Mass Effect experience. A new protagonist starts from zero in terms of player attachment, requiring exceptional writing and character development to overcome this inherent disadvantage. Creating a protagonist that simultaneously appeals to newcomers while satisfying veterans is an incredibly difficult balancing act that few game franchises have successfully navigated, Lean too heavily into the past and new players feel lost. Ignore it too much and longtime fans feel betrayed. Threading this narrative needle would require extraordinary skill and sensitivity. While Mass Effect 5 might center on a new protagonist, several beloved characters from the original trilogy, particularly members of long-lived species like Asari or Krogan, could return in significant roles. These familiar faces would provide continuity for longtime fans, offering emotional anchors in a changed galaxy while helping to pass the torch to a new generation of heroes. Liara T'Soni, with her centuries of potential lifespan, could have evolved from the shy archaeologist we first met to become a powerful matriarch. Grunt, still young for a Krogan, might now lead his own clan. Even shorter-lived species might be represented through descendants or recordings, ensuring the legacy of the original cast extends into this new chapter. Characters like Liara, Rex, or Grant already have deep emotional connections with players. Their return would provide immediate investment in the new story, giving fans familiar touchstones while they develop relationships with new characters. These long-lived characters could serve as living bridges between eras, providing first-hand accounts of the Reaper War while experiencing how the galaxy has transformed in its aftermath. Their perspective would span both the original trilogy and the new storyline, creating natural continuity between chapters of the saga. Seeing how familiar characters have grown and changed over time could provide some of the most emotional resonant moments in the new game. Witnessing Liara's evolution from a young scientist to wise leader, or Grant's maturation from impetuous youth to battle-hardened veteran, would reward longtime fans with satisfying character arcs that acknowledge the passage of time. Veteran characters could naturally serve as mentors or allies to the new protagonist, organically transferring the torch to a new generation while honoring the legacy of what came before. These relationships would create natural opportunities to reference past events without dwelling on them, acknowledging history while focusing on the challenges ahead. If returning characters don't serve the new narrative in meaningful ways, their presence might feel like empty nostalgia exploitation rather than substantive storytelling. Shoehorning in familiar faces just to please fans could actually undermine the integrity of the new story if these characters lack authentic purpose in the plot. Characters like Tali or Garrus might have died in some players' playthroughs of the original trilogy, creating continuity complications for their return. Similarly, the vastly different post-Reaper War galaxies resulting from the various ending choices would logically lead to different fates for surviving characters, making it difficult to present consistent versions of these beloved figures. If too much focus is placed on returning favorites, new characters might struggle to establish their own importance in players' hearts and minds. This could create an imbalanced narrative where players care more about the supporting cast than the protagonist, a problem that would undermine the central journey of Mass Effect 5. Writers might also feel creatively constrained by established characterization, limiting their ability to take necessary risks with the new story. The need to respect these characters' established personalities and histories could become narrative handcuffs rather than helpful guidelines. While the Reapers themselves might be gone, depending on the ending, their technological remnants and influence could continue to affect the galaxy in profound ways. From abandoned Reaper corpses being studied by various factions to lingering indoctrination effects in survivors, the ancient machine's shadow could stretch far beyond their physical presence. Perhaps isolated groups begin worshipping the Reapers as gods. Maybe Reaper technology, imperfectly understood, leads to new disasters when misused. Or the discovery of previously unknown Reaper artifacts could reveal deeper truths about their origins, challenging everything we thought we knew about these ancient adversaries. A post-Reaper galaxy would likely witness a technological gold rush as various factions scramble to secure and understand Reaper technology. This creates natural conflict scenarios without requiring a new existential threat. Corporate interests, military powers, and scientific organizations would all compete for these dangerous but valuable artifacts, laying the groundwork for compelling storytelling. Characters would face difficult questions about whether to destroy, study, or utilize Reaper technology, creating moral complexity consistent with the Mass Effect's thematic foundations. What price is acceptable for progress? How can we use the tools of our enemies without becoming like them? These ethical dilemmas could provide rich territory for meaningful player choices. The psychological impact of indoctrination could create haunting storylines about lingering trauma long after the war's end. Some survivors might still hear whispers in their minds, their perceptions subtly altered by exposure to Reaper influence. This could manifest as a psychological horror element, with characters unable to trust their own thoughts and perceptions. Delving into the true origin of the Reapers beyond the Catalyst explanation could drive an archaeological mystery narrative that deepens the franchise's lore. Perhaps the Catalyst itself wasn't entirely truthful, or maybe it didn't possess the complete picture, leaving room for discoveries that recontextualize our understanding of these ancient machines. After 3 games centered on the Reaper threat, continuing to focus on their technology or influence might feel like narrative stagnation, an inability to move beyond the original trilogy's central conflict. Players might grow frustrated with what feels like fighting the same war on a smaller scale rather than exploring truly new territory. In the Destroy ending, all Reaper technology was supposedly eliminated, creating ending contradictions if a sequel features surviving Reaper tech. Similarly, the Control ending established Shepard's consciousness guiding the Reapers, while Synthesis fundamentally changed the nature of all technology in the galaxy. These divergent scenarios make it difficult to present a consistent narrative about Reaper remnants. Any Reaper-adjacent threat would inevitably feel smaller than the Reapers themselves, potentially creating a sense of diminishing returns after the galaxy-expanding stakes of the original trilogy. Following an existential threat with Reaper technology in their own hands risks feeling anticlimactic regardless of how well it's executed. Many players might simply be ready to move on entirely from the Reapers, preferring to explore new aspects of the Mass Effect universe rather than continuing to deal with the fallout of the same antagonistic force. Fresh horizons might be more appealing than revisiting familiar shadows, no matter how those shadows have evolved. Perhaps the boldest approach would be connecting the Milky Way and Andromeda narratives, creating a unified story that spans both galaxies. This could involve the restoration of intergalactic communication or travel, the arrival of Andromeda Initiative colonists back in the Milky Way, or the discovery of a thread that spans both galactic theaters. This approach would not only resolve the somewhat abandoned storyline of Mass Effect Andromeda, but could create a truly epic scope for the franchise's future. A narrative canvas encompassing 2 entire galaxies and civilizations developing along different evolutionary paths. Connecting Andromeda to the main trilogy would give BioWare a chance for narrative reconciliation, integrating the spin-off story elements into the broader franchise in a way that might redeem its mixed reception. The abandoned plotlines involving the Ked, the Remnant technology, and the mysterious benefactor could find resolution within a larger, more cohesive framework. A story spanning 2 galaxies would provide an appropriately epic scale for a continuation, potentially even surpassing the scope of the Reaper War. The contrast between the recovering Milky Way and the frontier environment of Andromeda could create fascinating narrative juxtapositions, 2 civilizations at different evolutionary stages facing interconnected challenges. Setting part of the story in Andromeda, 600+ years in the future from the original trilogy, could provide the temporal distance needed to make the divergent endings of Mass Effect 3 less immediately relevant. The passage of centuries and the vast spatial separation could allow writers to acknowledge all endings as historically possible without being directly constrained by their immediate aftermath. This approach could naturally balance the familiar with the frontier, the known quantities of the Milky Way with the unexplored potential of Andromeda. This combination might appeal simultaneously to longtime fans and those who enjoy the spin-off's focus on exploration and discovery. The mysterious identity and goals of the Andromeda Initiative's benefactor, as well as the nature of the Scorch phenomenon, could be tied back to elements from the original trilogy, creating satisfying narrative connections that enhance both stories. Perhaps the Initiative was secretly founded in response to knowledge of the coming Reaper invasion, or maybe the Scourge shares origins with dark energy concerns hinted in earlier games. Trying to service both galactic settings might result in narrative dilution, with neither receiving enough development to feel fully realized. This split focus could undermine the depth that made the original trilogy so compelling, creating a story that feels scattered rather than cohesive. Mass Effect Andromeda received mixed reviews from fans and critics alike. Building upon its foundation risks inheriting some of its perceived narrative weaknesses, from less compelling companions to storytelling that some found less nuanced than the original trilogy. Creating 2 distinct galactic settings with the depth players expect from Mass Effect would present enormous development challenges, potentially forcing compromises in other areas of the game. The technical resources required to build 2 convincing galactic environments might stretch even modern hardware to its limits. The connection between galaxies, especially given the differences in timeline, could create significant narrative complexity that might confuse or alienate players. Explaining how events 600 plus years apart and 2.5 million light years distant influence each other would require careful writing to avoid feeling contrived or confusing. Players who didn't enjoy Mass Effect Andromeda might experience investment reluctance in a story that draws heavily from it. The emotional baggage associated with the spin-off could create resistance to plot elements that reference or build upon its foundation, regardless of how well these elements are integrated into the new narrative. As we have explored these potential paths for Mass Effect 5, a fundamental truth emerges. BioWare faces perhaps the most daunting sequel development challenge in gaming history. The Mass Effect trilogy wasn't merely a story, it was a deeply personal journey shaped by player choice, where individual decisions determine not just character relationships, but the fate of entire civilizations, and ultimately, all life in the galaxy. The divergent endings created narrative branches so fundamentally different that reconciling them within a single sequel feels nearly impossible. These aren't minor plot variations, they represent radically different galactic states with profoundly different implications for any continuation. The tepid reception to Mass Effect Andromeda offers both warning and guidance. Its attempt to sidestep the ending dilemma by relocating to a different galaxy sacrificed much of what made Mass Effect feel consequential. The emotional disconnection from established characters and storylines left many players feeling adrift in a universe that, while technically the same franchise, lacked the heart that made them fall in love with Mass Effect in the first place. Whatever direction Mass Effect 5 takes, certain elements seem essential to recapture the magic of the original trilogy. Meaningful choices. Player agency must remain central, with decisions that genuinely impact the narrative and relationships in ways that feel significant. Character depth. Complex, multifaceted characters with personal motivations beyond serving the main plot have always been the franchise's strongest asset. Moral complexity. The best Mass Effect storylines avoid easy answers, presenting ethical dilemmas where reasonable people could disagree on the correct course of action. Cultural richness. The detailed exploration of diverse alien societies gave the Mass Effect universe its distinctive depth and made its world feel alive beyond the player's immediate story. Balanced scope. The series thrives when it balances intimate, character-driven moments with galaxy-spanning stakes that give those personal connections context and meaning. Rather than directly continuing from any specific ending, BioWare might be better served by creating a narrative framework that acknowledges all possibilities while establishing a new foundation through creative approaches. A significant timeskip could allow the immediate consequences of each ending to have played out while establishing a new status quo that could plausibly emerge from any ending choice. Perhaps the mass relay network was permanently altered, creating a fragmented galaxy where isolated clusters develop independently without knowledge of others, allowing writers to selectively reference past events while creating fresh narrative territory. Over centuries, the true details of Shepard's choices could become muddled by myth and legend, with different cultures maintaining different versions of what happened, allowing the game to acknowledge all endings while leaving the truth deliberately ambiguous. Moving beyond the organic versus synthetic conflict, Mass Effect 5 could explore new philosophical territory and existential questions. What does it mean to be human, or Taurian, or Asari in a post-Reaper galaxy? How does civilization rebuild not just infrastructure but meaning after facing extinction? Above all, Mass Effect 5 needs to recapture what made players fall in love with the universe in the first place. The feeling of embarking on an epic journey across a meticulously crafted galaxy filled with complex characters, moral quandaries, and moments of both darkness and hope. The challenge isn't just resolving narrative contradictions, it's reigniting that sense of wonder and emotional investment that defined the original trilogy. Whatever form Mass Effect 5 takes, it must ultimately serve as both continuation and new beginning, honoring the legacy of what came before while charting a bold course into uncharted territory. The galaxy, or perhaps galaxies, await, and with them, the promise of a new adventure among the stars.